Just when it seemed like the headlines around Nick Cannon couldn't get any heavier, a new accusation has detonated straight through the public conversation. One of his children's mothers, choosing to remain unnamed, has come forward with a claim so unsettling that it stopped people mid-scroll. She alleges that Nick attempted to pressure their underage child into donating an organ. Let that sit for a moment. This isn't a misunderstanding. Not a poorly worded request. Not some uncomfortable family disagreement that could be brushed aside. We're talking about a child. And an organ. The moment that allegation surfaced, the narrative shifted from celebrity drama into something far more disturbing. Before anyone rushes to declare a villain or a victim, there's a grim question hanging over the entire situation. Is this woman exposing something deeply troubling that's been happening out of public view? Or is this a strategic legal move aimed at securing full custody and protection for her child? Whichever way the truth lands, there's no denying how dark this has become. According to reports, the mother has filed for emergency custody and a restraining order, stating she fears Nick may attempt to take the child. Her request isn't just about legal control, it's about safety. Both hers and her child's. Notably, the court documents don't specify which organ was allegedly mentioned. But at this point, that detail feels almost irrelevant. Once the conversation crosses into pressuring a minor for a body part, the ethical alarm bells are already blaring. Medical ethics don't play around when it comes to children. A minor donating an organ, especially to a parent, is considered an absolute last resort. It requires layers upon layers of legal approval, medical justification, and psychological evaluations, all designed to protect the child above everyone else. This isn't a topic that casually enters family discussions, and it's certainly not something the courts will take lightly. Fame doesn't soften that reality. Wealth doesn't rewrite those rules. Celebrity status offers no exemption. And while the public reaction has been loud, it hasn't been entirely shocked. People are stunned. Disgusted, even. But surprised? Not quite. For a while now, questions have been quietly circling around Nick Cannon's choices, his priorities, his health, and the sheer magnitude of the family he's built. 12 children. 6 different mothers. Multiple households operating at once. It's a lot for anyone to manage, let alone under the weight of ongoing health concerns. The image Nick has long presented, of a fully present, evenly distributed, endlessly involved father, has always felt strained to some. Admirable in theory, difficult to sustain in reality. Since his marriage to Mariah Carey came to an end, his life has barely slowed. The two married in 2008 and welcomed twins, Moroccan and Monroe, in 2011. After that chapter closed, Nick's personal life continued expanding at a pace that left many wondering how balance, attention, and emotional presence could realistically be maintained across so many children. Now, with allegations this serious on the table, those long-whispered concerns have erupted into something far more urgent. Whatever the truth ultimately reveals, this is no longer just about reputation or public image. It's about boundaries, ethics, and the protection of a child, and that's where the conversation stops being gossip and starts demanding accountability. By 2016, the divorce was officially behind him. The paperwork was done, the chapter closed. And almost immediately after, everything seemed to accelerate. It was as if a switch had been flipped. Birth announcements began rolling in one after another. New relationships surfaced in rapid succession. The pace was relentless, so much so that even people with no emotional stake in the story couldn't help but pause and ask, what is driving this? From the outside, it looked like a continuous surge, children arriving back to back, different women stepping into the spotlight year after year with barely a moment of silence in between. The headlines multiplied. The numbers climbed. And with every new announcement, the confusion only deepened. Whenever the questions came, Nick Cannon always had an answer ready. Sometimes he framed it as legacy. Other times as love. Sometimes as simply living life on his own terms. But no matter how many times he explained himself, those explanations never quite landed. They sounded practiced. Polished. Almost too neat for something this complex. Enough to respond, but not enough to convince. And so the cycle continued. More children. More attention. More people trying to piece together a puzzle that refused to make sense. When you actually trace the timeline, it becomes even harder to digest. Not long after his divorce was finalized, children were born with multiple women in close succession: Brittany Bell, Abby De La Rosa, Alyssa Scott, Brie Tiesi, Lanisha Cole, and at least one more whose name often gets lost in the shuffle. In one single year, 5 different women gave birth to 5 of his children. 2 of those babies were born in the same month. At one point, 8 of his children were under the age of 6 at the same time. Toddlers. Infants. Babies needing round-the-clock attention, all overlapping. At that scale, this stops feeling unconventional and starts feeling overwhelming. Not just logistically, but emotionally. It forces a question that many people were initially hesitant to say out loud: how does one person truly show up for all of them? Not just with money. Not with appearances. But with consistency. With presence. With the kind of daily emotional availability children depend on. Time, energy, and focus are finite resources. Split them enough ways, and something inevitably runs thin. And when that happens, it's usually the children who feel it first. Nick has always insisted that none of his kids were accidental. He said, repeatedly, that every woman he chose to have a child with was chosen intentionally, because he believed she would be a strong, capable mother. On paper, that sounds considerate. But in reality, it didn't settle the unease. If anything, it intensified it. Because intentionally planning children across 6 different households doesn't automatically equal responsibility. Sometimes, it raises more questions than it answers, about control, impulse, or priorities that may be misaligned. And this is where the story takes a heavier turn. Nick Cannon isn't just navigating fatherhood on an enormous scale. He's also been living with serious, ongoing health challenges. In 2012, he was diagnosed with lupus nephritis, a form of lupus that attacks the kidneys. Since then, he's faced repeated hospitalizations, kidney complications, pulmonary embolisms, and moments where his health took frightening turns. Living under that kind of medical reality changes a person. It reshapes how you think about time, about legacy, about survival. When your own body reminds you, regularly, that nothing is guaranteed, the future stops feeling distant. It feels close, pressing, sometimes terrifying. That kind of pressure creates urgency most people never experience. Later, stops being a promise and starts feeling like a gamble. And the instinct to secure tomorrow, by any means, becomes deeply human. Years ago, people began to joke. Or maybe half joke. The internet noticed the pattern and did what it always does, turned it into a theory. The idea that Nick might be having so many children to ensure a future organ donor started as dark humor, an exaggerated, cruel punchline meant to shock, not to be taken seriously. At first, it sounded absurd. Almost cartoonish. Something said for reactions, not belief. But as time passed, as his health struggles became more public and the number of children kept growing, the joke stopped landing the same way. What once felt ridiculous began to feel uncomfortable. The laughter turned nervous. The humor took on a morbid edge. When Nick eventually addressed the rumors, he leaned into what he does best, humor. He laughed it off. Mocked the idea. Made jokes about people thinking he was collecting bone marrow like baseball cards. He treated it as nonsense, unworthy of serious attention. And on the surface, it looked like confidence. Like someone completely unfazed. But humor is often armor. It's a way to steer the narrative. To decide how much vulnerability the world is allowed to see. Laughing doesn't always mean something doesn't sting, it often means someone refuses to let the pain show. Nick's public persona has always been loud, charismatic, playful. Serious topics rarely stay serious for long when he's the one speaking. So many people accepted his dismissal and moved on. Still, unease has a way of lingering. Especially when a rumor refuses to die. The internet doesn't forget, it recycles, reshapes, and reintroduces ideas over and over again. Every new pregnancy announcement. Every health update. Every interview mentioning lupus seemed to breathe life back into the conversation. Speculation alone doesn't equal truth. But repetition has power. When a narrative is echoed often enough, it begins to feel real, especially to those watching from the outside, trying to make sense of a story that keeps getting heavier with time. What added another layer of tension to the conversation were later whispers from insiders and scattered reports claiming that Nick Cannon had shown a notable interest in cord blood and stem cell preservation around the births of some of his children. Taken on its own, that detail isn't alarming. In fact, it's not unusual at all. Many parents choose to store cord blood as a precautionary measure, particularly when serious medical conditions run in the family. Cord blood has long been studied for its potential in treating a wide range of illnesses, including autoimmune disorders like lupus. It's rich in stem cells and, crucially, is often more easily accepted by the body than alternatives such as bone marrow. From a strictly medical perspective, preserving it can be viewed as forward-thinking, even responsible. When someone is living with a chronic, potentially life-threatening illness, thinking ahead isn't suspicious. It's survival. It's hope. It's the quiet decision to stay prepared in case science opens a door later on. In that light, curiosity about emerging treatments doesn't signal malice, it signals a will to live. But context changes everything. When that information was added to an already circulating rumor, it didn't calm the conversation, it intensified it. People stopped viewing the details as isolated facts and began stitching them together into a single narrative. His widely known health struggles. The rapid expansion of his family in a relatively short window. His own public acknowledgments that his lifespan may be shorter than most, statements that carry a weight few people are comfortable even imagining. None of these pieces, on their own, prove anything dark. Each one has a reasonable explanation. But combined, they created a picture that many found difficult to ignore, especially in a culture that feeds on speculation and thrives on turning uncertainty into conspiracy. There's also something deeply unsettling about how society responds when celebrities reveal vulnerability. Illness invites sympathy, but it also invites intrusion. People begin to dissect choices that should remain personal. Motives are assigned. Private decisions become public property. In Nick's case, the conversation drifted into territory that stripped away nuance and humanity, flattening complex family dynamics into a single, disturbing theory fueled more by fear than fact. What often gets lost is the reality of living with chronic illness. It doesn't just affect the body, it reshapes how someone views time, purpose, and legacy. When your health is unpredictable, the desire to leave something behind can grow intense. Legacy stops being about money or fame and starts being about people. Children become continuity. Proof that something of you will outlast your physical presence. Nick has spoken openly about love, abundance, and his belief in building a large family. Whether or not people agree with that philosophy, it stems from personal values, not necessarily clinical calculation. Still, once someone publicly acknowledges their mortality, everything they do becomes filtered through that lens. Every choice is reinterpreted. Every decision becomes symbolic. Even ordinary precautions are viewed with suspicion. The truth is, lupus is unpredictable. Flare-ups can be severe. Treatments can be draining. The emotional toll often goes unseen. Preparing for the worst while hoping for the best isn't paranoia, it's reality for many people living with chronic conditions. Exploring medical options, staying informed about scientific advances, or taking precautions others might never consider is often a reflection of that reality, not evidence of something sinister. Ultimately, much of the conversation surrounding Nick says as much about the public as it does about him. It exposes how quickly fear turns into narrative, how uncomfortable we are with illness and mortality, and how eager we are to simplify complex lives into unsettling explanations. We forget that beneath the headlines is a real person managing health scares, public scrutiny, and the responsibility of many lives depending on him. Strip away the jokes, the whispers, and the theories, and what remains is a man confronting his own mortality under a microscope. That burden alone is heavy. Everything else, the speculation, the morbid humor, the endless analysis, is noise layered onto an already difficult reality. Curiosity is human, but empathy should come first. Because illness isn't a storyline, it's a lived experience that reshapes every choice in ways outsiders may never fully grasp. That's why, when one of his children's mothers finally stepped forward and formally accused Nick of pressuring their own child to donate an organ, the reaction was different. It didn't feel like just another messy celebrity allegation. It landed with weight. For many watching, it felt like the moment when years of whispers and uneasy questions suddenly crystallized into something far more alarming. Not because people wanted to believe something so dark, but because the accusation seemed to align too cleanly with a pattern that had been quietly forming for years. This wasn't anonymous chatter or social media bait. This was a mother taking the matter to court, placing a child at the center of an allegation most people would consider unthinkable. And the truth is, concerns about Nick's parenting didn't begin here. Long before this claim surfaced, there were already signs that troubled some observers. One of his other children's mothers had previously admitted that communication with Nick often didn't happen directly. Messages went through assistants. Conversations about their child felt scheduled, filtered, transactional, less like co-parenting and more like coordinating with a corporate office. That detail lingered with people because it suggested distance. Emotional detachment. A gap between the public image of a hands-on, deeply involved father and the private reality some women described. So when these new allegations emerged, they didn't arrive out of nowhere. They landed in an environment already shaped by questions about emotional presence, power imbalances, and the sheer logistics of parenting so many children across so many households. To many, it didn't feel random. It felt like escalation. Like the next, more disturbing chapter in a story people had been watching with unease for years, hoping it wouldn't end up exactly where it now seemed to be headed. What pushed this situation from complicated to chaotic was what unfolded immediately afterward. Just as the allegations began gaining serious traction, another one of Nick's children's mothers stepped forward online, and she didn't whisper. She went public, loudly defending him. In her version of events, Nick was attentive, loving, fair. A devoted father who shows up for every child and treats their mothers with respect and care. On its own, that kind of testimony might have carried weight. After all, people can experience the same individual in very different ways. But timing has a way of changing how things are received. Because not long before this sudden show of support, that same woman had been saying something else entirely. She had voiced frustration about Nick's absence. She had questioned how involved he truly was. She had spoken openly about feeling like the responsibility of parenting often fell unevenly on her shoulders. So when her narrative abruptly flipped, right as these allegations were exploding, people took notice. The internet has a long memory. Old posts resurfaced. Screenshots circulated. Comment sections filled with skepticism. Many weren't just doubtful, they were openly suspicious. To them, this didn't feel like a natural change of heart. It felt coordinated. Strategic. Like damage control rather than personal truth. The idea that Nick might be attempting to get ahead of the story before it fully spiraled didn't sound far-fetched to a public well-versed in PR playbooks. In an era where narratives are shaped in real time and reputations are carefully managed, every public statement starts to feel intentional, especially when legal filings and a child's well-being are involved. Nick's own response didn't help calm the waters. Rather than issuing a direct, unequivocal denial or addressing the accusation head-on, he leaned into a familiar approach. He hinted at clout chasing. Suggested ulterior motives without naming them. Kept his language vague. Carefully worded. Non-committal. Legally cautious, perhaps, but emotionally unsatisfying. That kind of ambiguity may have worked in the past, when the rumors lived mostly online and could be dismissed as gossip. When nothing had been formally filed. When no legal paperwork existed to anchor speculation to reality. But this time was different. This time, there was a court filing. This time, a child wasn't just part of the background, they were the center of the issue. And that changed the tone completely. People can debate unconventional family structures and messy co-parenting arrangements all day. Those conversations are uncomfortable, but familiar. What's harder to ignore is the suggestion that a parent might pressure a child into something so extreme, something with permanent physical consequences. That allegation crosses a moral boundary most people don't even want to imagine. It also brings power dynamics into sharp focus. Nick is wealthy, famous, and influential. His children's mothers, while not without agency, don't carry the same level of cultural or financial power. When accusations flow upward, towards someone with a massive platform, the public instinctively wonders how much pressure might exist behind the scenes. Spoken or unspoken. Subtle or direct. That's part of why the sudden, glowing defense from one baby mama unsettled so many people. It raised uncomfortable questions about influence, loyalty, and whether praise or silence can sometimes be encouraged, intentionally or otherwise. At the same time, not everyone sees Nick as the villain here. Some believe he's being unfairly targeted. They argue that his unconventional lifestyle already places him under scrutiny most parents never face. That every mistake, every disagreement, every rumor is magnified because of who he is. From that perspective, the clout-chasing explanation feels plausible to them. But even among his defenders, one issue keeps surfacing: the lack of a clear, direct response.